You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. And as I announced last week, we have finally opened the doors to enrollment for our brand new creation, Waking the Wild Heart. This is a journey into the wild, soulful depths of intimacy, love, and polarity, and it's for both individuals and couples. So this is for you if you're either already in a relationship and are ready to create more juicy, fulfilling, and loving intimacy with your partner, or you're currently single and are ready to create a relationship of this kind. Together, we will free you from the conditioning that's keeping you closed and awaken you to the wildness of your heart, empowering you to express your desire and passion and enable you to open as love. We can measure the extent we're living fully by how open our hearts are. Living fully is living with an open heart. Are you ready to live fully? We begin on Thursday, the 3rd of September. There will be limited places and already some have gone, and I suspect the rest will get snapped up fast. So if you're feeling this could be for you, go and have a look at the details and claim your place at primalhappiness.co/WTWH. A couple of questions I've been asked already that I'll share with you in case you're wondering something similar. I've been asked, will there be men? And yes, there absolutely will. There already are men. So if you're a man and you're thinking, oh, I don't know, will I be on my own? You won't be. Come join us. Love to have you with us. And the other question I've been asked is, will it all be couples or is it likely there'll be single people there too? And again, yes, absolutely. There's going to be a real mixture of both couples and single people, and then also individuals who are in a relationship, but they're coming on their own to Waken the Wild Heart, if that makes any sense. So there's going to be a kind of real mixture of all kinds of people in all sorts of relationship situations. And again, I can't remember if I just said this, we've already had singles join. So no matter who you are, you're not going to be on your own. Come join us if you're feeling the call. And the link again is primalhappiness.co/WTWH. And now onto this week's show. It's with Dave Burns, who is a coach, angel investor, and an essayist with a background in relational work, partner meditation, mindful business training, and classical philosophy. His work today centers around the interplay between ancient wisdom and modern practicality. A very happy husband, he lives in Costa Rica with his wife in a small town where the jungle meets the sea. In fact, you'll hear more about that jungle. He actually had the parrots outside his window just as we were about to record. And I think we mentioned that when we got into the show. And in this show, we spoke about personal artistry, how we can bring an energetic of our unique inner embodiment to any practice, how we might discover that and what it feels like. We also spoke about having a personal blueprint and how to distinguish between resistance that shows up with an edge that's aligned for you versus something that's scary but not for you. This was such a fascinating episode. I really love this. Those of you who've been practicing artists, for example, I don't know, musicians or even martial artists, will find this particularly interesting. But honestly, I believe it's incredibly helpful and inspiring regardless. Let's jump in. Hello, Dave. A warm welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And we just had the experience that for me was a first of us being interrupted by a herd, she called them, of parrots outside your window, which was quite a delight for me.
Yeah, we have a lot of amazing. It's been one of the, we relocated down to Central America about 4 months ago. And one of my favorite blessings personally so far has been interacting with sort of a shocking array of different animal life, the hermit crab social dynamics, and the different kinds of, it turns out a bunch of lizards actually make sounds. They're little singing lizards.
No way.
Nearby, very loud
I'm quite
sounds.
Familiar with lizards, I
lizards.
thought.
There's something called, I believe, the screaming gecko that lives in our house. We have a little colony of leafcutter ants directly beneath the house.
Wow.
And a little highway that they bring their leaves through just under our front porch and going. So it's amazing. There's a lot of living teachers around.
Oh my goodness, you've really taken me back. I lived part of my childhood in Ibiza, very wild, as in literally we lived almost on a beach, on a nudist beach, under a fig tree, literally under a fig tree. And so many of the animals you just described were just like embedded, like the fabric of our life was, with lizards and ants, not parrots. So you're really taking me back. Yeah, it's amazing how I think you learn to kind of be part of the ecosystem, don't you? You start to realize, like, I can't force my will onto nature. I need to kind of like be more malleable and like be fluid with it. That's certainly, that was when I was a child. I don't know if it's different, kind of landing into the wild as an adult, but that was definitely what I took from that.
Yeah, very much so. That's beautifully said.
Yeah, it's just really because I'm quite, these days, if we have kind of insects come into the house, I'm just like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I'm used to sleeping with ants. It's no big deal. But yeah, I think that's quite unusual these days. Anyway, into the show, and we haven't planned out really in detail at all what we're talking about, other than we were kind of looking at different topics we could talk about. And one of them you mentioned was around personal artistry. And this idea of, I guess, creating your own kind of potent, unique way of being, working, whatever. And I said to you, I really noticed my body kind of like go, oh, I like the sound of that. And a lot of our work is very much people discovering that unique gift that they came here to be and being it. So it feels like there's a lot of alignment there. And I would just love to hear, what's your take on this? And I said, I get this real sense of intentionality with you. You've got this sort of sense of purposefulness, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that shows up for you in relationship to personal artistry. So take this wherever you want to go.
Yeah, thank you. I will. I guess it would make sense to start off with a concrete example of what I had in mind broadly with the question of personal artistry in business. In the land of business, my first real encounter with this and sort of lived experience was fairly early on in my work. I had a job actually on a sales team for a personal development company. And for about 6 months of being full-time, I sort of dabbled in helping the company with that prior, but 6 months of full-time salespersonship on a traditional sales team with a CRM and everything else. And broadly, I was quite terrible, quite terrible. I received a decent amount of training, and on my own, I decided, okay, this is my job. I'll commit to the craft. I'll study what I can. There are a lot of amazing resources and books out there about the art of sales and marketing broadly. So I was attempting to learn these things, and still for about 6 months, I was making less for the company than I was being paid. I was doing some extra work, so it sort of it wasn't simply necessarily unfair. I was generating leads and putting out marketing materials and this kind of thing. But on the sales front, I was a liability. But trying very, very hard.
Not a comfortable place to be.
Yeah. So there was one specific, after about 6 months, I wish I remembered the precise turning point of like what I read or what occurred to me. But for whatever reason, I've been a cellist since I was 6. I started playing cello very early and played very seriously throughout school and college, and played some professionally afterwards, and taught and cello is very much kind of lives inside of my bones. And there was one particular turning point. I believe it was a March. It's an early springtime. I had been working for about 6 months, just tanking. And somehow the idea occurred to me that it's possible that selling could feel just like cello. And that month, the amount that I had been making kind of for the company on average went up by a factor of 10, like a 0 was added. And then the month after that, it went up by a factor of 5 again, so 50 times as much as I had been making 2 months prior. And that sort of set the stage for, that was kind of the new baseline for business life after that, particularly interacting with this kind of strange world called selling. And really all that happened, I mean, there was some practice going into it, but really all that happened for this sort of hockey stick growth moment in terms of skill was the transfer of the inner template, essentially treating the thing as a musical activity rather than as, for instance, a technical one.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I love that. It was so funny because where I thought you were going to take the story was, you then, I guess, sort of saw, okay, this is a discipline that I need to dedicate myself to, and hours of practice. And then kind of, I don't know, a year from then, you suddenly had mastery, but like, no.
No. I mean, that's true. I'm an ardent supporter of discipline and practice, and some of that probably went into that point, but no. I was like, oh, I can treat this. In my heart, I'm sort of fundamentally a musical person, like partly by nature and partly by training. And so I was like, oh, if this is a musical activity, I know how to engage in musical activities. It's immediate.
Wow. So I would love you to, if we can kind of like imagine we're going to rip the roof off and take a look in. What was that template? What happened? What was that shift? For me, it feels like a kind of energetic shift where you like embodied the musician in relationship to sales. But I'd love to like what makes that? What went on?
Yeah, gladly. Unfortunately, it's a tricky thing to articulate in the realm of music specifically. Musicians are sort of notoriously terrible at describing what it's like to create music and how that happens. But I will do my best. So I think about it sort of like this. There are the external layers of a given skill, which are very specific to a skill. There's like the art of tea ceremony, for instance, is a very specific skill, and you have to learn that art on its own, with its own forms and structures and muscle memory, et cetera. And the art of playing a given instrument, like the violin, is its own. And you can't just take playing a violin, for instance, and the external shell of skill of that, and transfer that over to like playing the trombone or tea ceremony. They're completely, you're doing different things. And within the external specifics of a skill, there's a kind of heart of the skill, which is a combination of a certain attentional pose. There's a certain distribution of attention in different places throughout the body. And then a collection of these sort of fundamental forms. So like with music, for instance, you're always leaning into one of the forms internally that you're always leaning into is a kind of forward falling and also holding still or steady with the rhythm. And you're also finding you're aiming at a certain sort of intangible sweet spot between what's predictable, what kind of perfectly satisfies the listener's expectations, and what breaks them suddenly. And that sort of form of these intangible, the kind of intangible intimacy with the underlying principles of the skill and the sort of attentional position that you have to hold with all of those things, that's getting developed simultaneously inside of any. And like, to me, music means that. It means a certain kind of like, there's a certain kind of letting go, there's a certain kind of consciousness, there's a certain kind of leaning into these invisible sweet spots. And ultimately, all of that you can translate into any specific domain, including selling or coaching or anything else. And then essentially make all of the practice that happened in a given domain transfer over in its fundamentals into a new one.
Oh, I love that so much. Something that just came to mind is for many years, from my late teens through my 20s, I was really into martial arts, and then stopped when I was kind of early 30s, I think. And then recently, my children have been begging me for lessons. So we've just started with boxing because I kind of want to get real basics in first.
Yeah.
And I've been really recognizing like how much of it is in the body. And so the way I'm teaching them is so much more about that kind of trying to feel that energetic.
Right.
And also noticing how hard it is to articulate it. And I'm constantly asking them to like feel and close their eyes and like, sense where their bodies is and like where their energy is. And so it's really interesting. I've got that example recently, and I've noticed over the years, how often there will be this like sensation of like, what does this remind me of? And then I'll remember, oh yeah, it's that feeling of martial arts. And it's really hard, like you said, to word, because it's like in the body, it's felt. Right. But I have never applied it in that intentional way that you've talked about, like seeing how that could then be brought to something else. So I'd like to now see how you saw that was possible, because it seems really unlikely in a way, doesn't it? Taking that energetic of being a musician into selling. So can you try and join those dots? Like how do those two things align?
Yeah, gladly. So when there are two things that are happening in any moment. There's what you're doing with your body, and then there's what you're doing with your attention. Mm-hmm. And they're linked, but they're distinct. Mm-hmm. And so when the body is learning a certain, like with a martial art, so what martial art did you study?
Oh, I did several. The one I spent most of the time in was kickboxing. I also did a bit of Aikido and a bit of boxing separately.
Amazing. Okay, great. So it's very grounded in practical martial arts.
Yes.
Yeah. Extremely good. Okay, so like with martial arts, for instance, if you're training in martial arts from early on or for a long period of time, then of course you're developing muscle memory of, okay, like this is exactly how to transfer weight from the twist in a foot up through swiveling of the hips and have it move out without any obstruction through the shoulder and through the arm into right cross, for instance. Like that, there's a very specific muscular pattern that you develop through training over and over and over and over. And eventually it's an unobstructed channel. And there's just a little bit of effort and there's a ton. So that's one thing. But the other thing that's happening simultaneously is there's a certain mental pose that's a combination of radical intentionality and a kind of goal orientation, and also a sort of effort. There's the attentional pose of force. Yes, force. And then simultaneously total relaxation. It's
so funny because I've been trying to language that. I've been saying to my children, relax and snap, to try and get them to like feel. That's what I'm trying to like. It's the combination of relax and snap. But yeah, what you just said is so similar to what I was trying to explain to them. Yeah.
It's very hard to articulate. Especially because like any skill, I think ultimately is built out of these sort of competing principles. Like how, okay, you have to transfer in all of your power and all of your force and be 100% relaxed at the same time. Like, what are you talking about? Right? Okay, but that's every skill. It's like that. And so that kind of dialogue between those different pieces and the ability to hold both of those, like this, the ability of a martial art, like you have this inside of you, and it's probably you through martial arts you develop, you can have this force of attention, like full attention and intentionality sort of outwards, and also be completely relaxed simultaneously. You learn how to do that internally. And then that internal pose is incredibly useful in everything, in podcast interviews, in business, in coaching, in partnership, also, certainly, to have all of yourself fully expressed and have kind of the full totality of devoted love pouring outwards without any forcedness or efforting simultaneously, like being fully relaxed and not abandoning yourself or making yourself do anything that you don't want to or any force, but also being loving outwards simultaneously. Like that's a martial arts pose.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I'm loving this conversation. I'm so glad now. I'm thanking my past self for like going like, yeah, let's talk about this because I'm so digging it. So I love that kind of, and I've never been able to quite talk about it in that way. Like I can so see how you could talk about it as like yin yang, masculine, feminine. I can so see how that shows up in so many areas, but I've never really seen it in relationship to learning a skill quite as clearly as we are in this conversation. So I'm loving that. And it's so funny that like literally this whole relaxed snap thing, it's only as we're talking about it now, I'm seeing, oh yeah, that's what that is. Yeah, wonderful. So what would that have looked like? You don't have to keep going back to that example. I mean, I'm happy to, because I think there's so much in the example of selling, but feel free to bring others in. But how would that have kind of manifested or looked like in relationship to like that big shift, that jump that you made in your performance? Like what was going on there?
Sure. Well, I can describe that thank you for continuing to bring it back to the specifics. I have a general gravity sort of towards the abstract principles. This is very useful to ground it. I describe it two different ways. One, the simplest way to describe it is like if you're a cellist and you close your eyes and you imagine playing cello and you imagine your body taking on the position of playing cello and then actually playing it, like the attentional position of playing the cello. Then take that and then you open your eyes and you enter into a sales conversation, but you maintain that same internal pose as if you were playing cello. Right? That on its own was what kind of caused the immediate transfer and breakthrough. Very, very simply. It's like I just imagined that I was holding a cello and playing it and bowing it while I was in conversations.
Wow. Okay. I really wasn't expecting you to say that either. I was imagining you were going to say, and so I imagined I was doing this amazing sales call and kind of then, brought my book. But I wasn't expecting you to actually say you literally were bringing the embodiment of playing the cello to the sales conversation.
Yeah. Because there's the whole, imagining the musculature and the act itself, right, then brings back by association all of the things that have to be going on inside when you're doing that. And so just imagining that was I don't do that anymore. It's been internalized. But when I started, that's all it was.
Yeah. Wow. So, and I love, like, as you're saying, ultimately that's at the heart of that energetic of really anything that we're bringing our kind of full, you could use all different kinds of words like full presence to or full attention to. But I also love that you said, it's not that on its own wouldn't have worked, I'm guessing, without having also learned the kind of practical elements of the skill too. It's like both are required.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. That's beautifully said. I think this sort of transfer wouldn't have worked if I hadn't developed some sort of familiarity with what you could call the fundamentals of the craft. Certainly. But the fundamentals of the craft, I was terrible at. Like that wasn't enough on its own. That wasn't working.
Yeah, and it's probably also actually what's at play when anyone's great at anything, isn't it? It's very rarely just that they're really good at the skill. It's probably underlying is always this place that we're talking about that they're embodying even if they
Yeah.
wouldn't actually be able to language it that way.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the sort of the heart of every skill that makes the whole thing live.
So if we then look at going back to how you described this at the beginning, that kind of artistry, that creational way of living. And you did use the word unique, didn't you, when we
I believe,
first
yeah.
talked? Yeah. So if we look at this as in there's that's useful, really useful to be able to kind of turn to any skill we want to use. What does that look like through the lens of us understanding this kind of unique gift, this unique medicine that we are,
Right.
and kind of bringing that into the world in this intentional way?
Yeah, what is a beautiful question. There's so many different directions we could go with this. I'll do my best to keep it concrete again, because that is an ongoing challenge for me. I'll say a couple of things. So one is there are layers to what makes an artistic blueprint. Like my artistic blueprint in the world has music as a pretty foundational one. So like if I'm going to engage in sort of any art form, like it's going to feel musical to me in some way. But there are additional layers besides just musicality, right? There are some other things that say I am, whether by nature or childhood training. One of the things that I am is pretty private. I'm not a super, like, I love privacy. And I love being back. I love actually not sharing. I love being the one I love being the silent one in a conversation, or the one who's asking questions. Like coaching is an amazing place for me because of that, on the whole. So like generally not being private, sharing transparently it takes a certain amount of intentionality and focus. And that's an important practice for me. Obviously, of like transparently sharing and revealing and coming out. And that'll probably be an ongoing practice for me throughout my life. And there's also a truth and a power that exists in privacy. Like being fully expressed is kind of one side of an important polarity. And so when it comes to, for instance, business, like I am very unlikely to ever run a business that's at least centered around myself, like a coaching business, for instance, by being heavily out there in the world of marketing. That's not who I am. There are other people who, if they were not heavily out there in the world of marketing, like putting out social media posts every day and constructing beautiful nurture sequences and lead magnets and actively running Facebook ads across different channels and going on. There are people who, if they weren't doing that, they would be abandoning who they are, because who they are is outwards. They're outwards sharing. They're gregarious. They're heavily extroverted, all of these things. So some people would be truly abandoning themselves if they weren't doing that. The opposite is the case for me. Like if I were running personal Facebook ads for my own coaching services, that would be off artistically. I would have to bend myself into a shape that's not true to my natural artistic blueprint. And my artistic blueprint has a shadow. Privacy has the shadows of secrecy, of obscurity, all of these things that I've had to like work on through my life to integrate. But at the same time, like the true way for me to run a coaching business, for instance, is to have a super simple, minimalist, mysterious website, right? And really just get introductions from trusted clients as referrals. That's who I am in the world of business. And if I acknowledge that, then I can lean into it consciously and not only like succeed by harnessing my natural artistic strengths, but also not have to deal with the sort of constant grading, static feeling of trying to pull yourself into poses that are not native to you because you feel like that's needed in order to succeed.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's really interesting because if we look at that again as a polarity, my co-founder and I are like complete opposite ends. He's very, very similar to you. And we've just been in conversation about that recently. And I'm about as extrovert as you can get. Like if I do a Myers-Briggs test or something, I'm like off the scale extrovert. And it works really well when you have both like that. Although, of course, that can create tension too, where I'll be kind of like, are you ever going to post anything?
Right.
But I think, again, when you can know yourself and honor, and as you say, kind of know the light of that and know the shadow of that too. And build like you going back to what you originally said, create your life from there that honors that and respects that and aligns with that. It feels much better than, as you're saying, that kind of I can't remember quite how you languaged it, but that kind of like feeling where it's not just stepping into an edge, but there's a different feeling, isn't there, when you're energetically pulling against that blueprint.
100%. Yeah, that's very well said. It could be challenging to distinguish between, you could say, the resistance that comes from just calcified, fearful habits that you've accrued throughout your life, and the resistance that comes from a deep inner knowing of who you are, for sure. But there is a distinction.
Yes. Actually, that would be quite a nice thing to look at, actually. I was talking to a client about this, I think on Monday. And I think before we really bring our attention there and sort of see that actually most of our growth is going to come from the places that are giving that feeling of, but they are aligned for us. Like we want to be attuned to what that is versus that stuff that's like feels, but actually isn't for us. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that, because again, it is like the more attuned to that we can be and the more sovereign we can be to say, okay, it's scary, but I'm going to choose it anyway, because that's where kind of expansion lies. That to me is us being able to kind of live most fully, most openly into the world. So I would love to hear what you've got to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredibly hard question and a super important topic, and something I wish I had a simple answer for, but I'll share a couple of experiences. In terms of navigating this, I guess I'll put it as like coming to be able to distinguish between self-abandonment and deliberate leaning into a growth edge, or between simply fearful resistance and wise resistance, or reluctance. Like developing that sort of distinction, I haven't found any simple way to distinguish between them, except by treating that distinction itself as a fundamental skill that gets developed through failure. So essentially, like, obviously the practice of the cultivation of internal intuition is necessary, but the practice of learning to receive feedback from people who might be able to see better than you can see yourself in certain areas, into certain blind spots, is also strictly necessary. So I consider those two to be sort of the two fundamental skills, in a way, like radically honest, clear internal intuition that gets cultivated primarily through meditation on one side, and then the other side, the development of the ability to gracefully and openly integrate feedback. And then in addition to that, it's sort of like you're always going to, at least my experience is, I will always choose, it'll be impossible for me to choose my growth edge if I don't have a certain specific capacity online that I'll call, for the sake of simplicity here, courage. Like if I'm not in a state of sort of actively leaning forward and in to, not necessarily chasing discomfort, but like willing to bear it. And if I haven't strengthened that muscle deliberately through kind of systematic leaps of faith and cold showers and exercise and all of the various disciplines that you lean, then you're guaranteed to confuse fearful resistance for wise resistance all of the time. So basically, kind of like, I don't think there's an answer, but meditation, the practice of feedback, and then the deliberate practice of cultivating the courage muscle seem like necessary components.
Yeah, that really makes sense to me. I was just pondering then, as you were talking, wondering, this isn't me knowing this is a genuine wondering, whether there is I'm talking in massive generalizations here, as if men are all the same and women are all the same. Clearly, that's not the case. But generally, if men do cultivate that intuition more through meditation, and women cultivate that more through kind of being in their body, movement, that for me has felt more the path. And again, it's not that I know that I'm right on this. It's just what came to me as you were talking. I just wonder if you have a thought on that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I say meditation, I don't specifically mean sitting meditation.
So it could be like body-led movement or something like that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think one of the most useful types of meditation for anyone is, for instance, nonlinear movement practices, 5 rhythms, ecstatic dance, anything like that fully liberates. That's, in many cases, a far, far more useful type of meditation.
You must say that in future then, because people are just going to misunderstand you, Dave.
You're right. That's an excellent point. My apologies.
That really, it doubly makes sense now what you said. Yeah. And I think that for me has been, again, why it's so difficult to put this into words. It so is in the feeling. I think you start to know how different things feel in your body. Like I've become more and more sensitive to this feels aligned, this doesn't. They both feel scary. This one feels aligned. Right. And it is a feeling that I've got familiar between. And I also love what you said about it's that kind of stepping into the courage that's required to sort of step into that risk. But in a weird way, it's the kind of experience of failure and then looking back that's really helped me that it's often in hindsight, I notice those failures I've had that have still been coming from aligned action. I sort of still feel good about it, if that makes sense. I kind of think, well, the failure was part of it. I still feel that felt aligned. That felt true to me. Right. And I feel good about that choice, even though technically it didn't work out. And it's that kind of helped build that sensitivity of like, oh yeah, so I can trust that feeling, even when it ends up in a disaster.
It's beautifully said. It's beautifully said. You know who's really good at that specific kind of thinking and retroactive analysis is poker players.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Professional poker. I have some professional poker player friends. And I've had ex-professional poker player clients, and they're brilliant at it because in poker, like you can play perfectly for an extended period of time and continue losing money. So you have to develop, just because there is an element of luck involved, it's exclusively a long game, essentially. So you have to develop this capacity to like be proud of and to reflect positively back on the correct decisions you made that led to terrible outcomes.
Oh, wow.
And to not simply be happy with the decision because it led to a good outcome.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I don't think I've ever made it quite so conscious as I was just saying it to you, but I love that lens of, because ultimately it is all a long game, isn't it? Like it's, at what point do you ever look at something and say that was a success?
Right.
But we forget that. It's very easy to see like, no, that was the game. And then it's all over. I love that. So how are we doing for time? Wow. So this has flown by. I love this conversation. Where would you like to take it next? We've probably got another 5 or so minutes. What would you think is going to be most useful to leave our listeners with in terms of either making this something that they can attune to and kind of make manifest in their lives, or a next step, or a kind of place to look? Is there anything that you would suggest? Because again, this is gorgeous for me, but it is kind of, some of it's been quite intangible, even though we have brought it as much as we can down to the practicalities. But what else would you think would be useful to share?
Well, I guess if we can summarize for clarity some of the points that we've hit, and we might find some additional things to add on to that. Broadly speaking, I'd say the usefulness of the dedication to holding one's true artistic style in the face of any craft that appears to be distinct from it.
Oh, yes. I'm so glad you brought this up. So this links to what you said about the blueprint. So would you say that most people have got their own kind of version of that, their own artistic blueprint. Like it seems that, at least one of mine is that kind of martial artist blueprint, which is a place I can tune into and bring to any practice. Have you seen through your work with others that people do tend to have their own version of that?
So everyone has kind of a natural artistic essence or style. Certainly. Not everyone has a specific practice that they've cultivated for decades that they can then transfer. So I would say there's a famous jazz quote that it can take a long time before you start to play like yourself. I think it's Miles Davis, which is beautiful. But essentially, I think I haven't found it super useful in working with clients to spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what their artistic essence is in a conceptual way. Like ultimately you discover who you are artistically by throwing yourself into a ring where you have rapid feedback, like somewhere where you cannot fool yourself, some specific craft. Music is an amazing one. Martial arts is another amazing one. Like you can't fake your way through a sparring match, for instance. But over the course of being in the practice with honest feedback loops, then in retrospect, all of a sudden you discover, oh, this is who I am. Who I am is this construction of I'm this particular. And then once some of that awareness develops, it doesn't have to be super conceptual, but just that inner sense of, oh, this is who I am. Then the ongoing commitment to extending into growth edges and integrating the shadow of your natural style while also being truer and truer and capitalizing more and more on your natural native strengths, right? I've seen be enormously useful for myself and literally everyone who I've worked on that with.
Yeah, there's a real kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg in this, in that what we were talking about kind of towards the end of our conversation about being able to attune to what's for us and what isn't, largely comes from that kind of being able to be, deeply embodied, be deeply like sensitive to that feeling. And that feeling's also developed through kind of throwing ourselves into things that we won't know if they're for us or not. Like we kind of need to do both, don't we, before we're ready?
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said.
I love that. I feel like I've taken a real gift from this conversation where, again, it's over the years, there's been times where I can really see how those years of martial arts training have benefited me, but I haven't seen it for the gift it really was and is until this conversation. So I kind of think like, oh wow, I feel really glad personally we've had this conversation.
Yeah.
And I suspect there's probably going to be listeners who have had a kind of similar like wow moment where there's kind of like who's just coming to mind is Dita Von Teese. I was listening to her interview on the Tim Ferriss show last week, and she trained as a ballet dancer for years and years and years, and then kind of, I think, but just because of a kind of body makeup, I think it takes like a specific kind of body to be a really successful ballet dancer, and she didn't have that particular type of body. And then obviously she got into burlesque and then's become who she's become. And as she was talking, I can really see her experience in what we've just talked about there. Like it was that kind of inner ballet dancer, that kind of like the pose of the ballet dancer that she then brought to burlesque. And so I'm hoping like listeners have all had like these light bulbs go on of like, oh yes, my years of, I don't know, hockey playing can really be brought to, I don't know how I do, go in business. But I also think recognizing what you said, not everyone has had a kind of particular art or practice for years, and that doesn't matter either. We can kind of discover that for ourselves.
Beautifully said.
I love that. So we are now out of time, and this has just been like such a delicious conversation. I've loved it. If a listener would like to find out more about you, I know that you're private, but I'm hoping they can at least go find out more. I know that I first discovered you through your writing, and you describe yourself as an essayist. So where can they find out about you?
Yeah, gladly. I do have, it's a somewhat private and mysterious website, but I do have a website for sure. It's dave-burns.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. Really have enjoyed it.
Oh, such a pleasure and an honor, Leah. I look forward to next time we get to connect.
Wow, what an inspiring episode. Here are my best bits. The embodied feel of full attention, intention, and purpose, and full relaxation is the pose that Dave was describing that we can bring to any practice. Understanding your own unique blueprint, including your artistic essence and your personal traits, will help you create your life, business, and relationships in alignment with it. Attuning to the body via all forms of meditation, especially embodied kinds such as the static dance, is one of the most powerful ways to sensitize how our intuition shows up in our bodies. Lastly, throwing yourself into practice is ultimately how we discover ourselves and what is for us. If you'd like to get notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 289. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, we have now opened enrollment to Waking the Wild Heart. You can probably hear how excited I am about that. It's taken way longer than we'd hoped to get to the point of actually being able to open enrollment. So to the point where I was actually having people email me and say, has it opened yet? So it is now finally open for enrollment. So if you've been hanging on waiting, you can now go and get your place. And we begin on Thursday, the 3rd of September. And as I've mentioned before, there will be limited places. Already some have gone. They will get snapped up fast. So if you're feeling this is for you, go and claim your place at primalhappiness.co/WTWH. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit subscribe. That way you'll get each episode magically delivered to your device as soon as it's released. And oh my goodness, we have got I feel like I've said this so many times, and then each time I say it, I feel like what I'm about to say, it's like taking it to a whole new level. The guests we have coming on the show over the next few weeks are just, really incredible. So aligned to our work, so aligned to our message of reclaiming your wildness, actualizing your deepest gifts. So yeah, if you're loving the kinds of things we've been talking about lately, there's more to come. Don't miss out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.